Thank you besties for watching the part 1. This is the part 2 of the very emotional story titled, They Got Married at a Very Young Age and Regretted It. As she turned to leave, Mark felt an overwhelming urge to ask her to stay. But he held back, watching as she walked down the hallway and out of sight. Closing the door, Mark leaned against it, his heart pounding. He couldn't deny it any longer, he was developing feelings for Sarah. And that realization both thrilled and terrified him. As the days turned into weeks, Mark and Sarah's bond continued to grow stronger. Lucy's absence, which had initially felt like a gaping hole in their lives, was now filled with a sense of peace and contentment that Mark hadn't experienced in a long time. One evening, after JJ had been put to bed, Mark and Sarah found themselves sitting on the small balcony of the apartment, enjoying the cool night air. The city lights twinkled below them, and a comfortable silence settled between them. Mark turned to Sarah, his heart pounding. "Sarah, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for us. You've been a lifesaver." Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "It's been my pleasure, Mark. JJ is such a joy, and..." She hesitated, then continued softly, "I've really enjoyed spending time with you too." Their eyes met, and Mark felt a surge of emotions he had been trying to suppress. Without thinking, he leaned in closer to her. Sarah didn't pull away. Their faces were inches apart, and Mark could feel the warmth of her breath. Just as their lips were about to meet, Sarah suddenly pulled back, her eyes wide. "We can't do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark felt a mix of disappointment and shame wash over him. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "You're right, of course." Sarah stood up, wringing her hands nervously. "Mark, you're married. No matter what's happening with Lucy, you're still legally her husband. And JJ's father." Mark nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I know. I'm sorry, Sarah. I don't know what came over me." Sarah gathered her things quickly. I think I should go. It's getting late." As she headed for the door, Mark called out, "Will you still come tomorrow?" Sarah paused, her hand on the doorknob. She turned back to him, her expression a mix of sadness and resolve. "Yes, I'll be here. For JJ. But Mark, we need to be clear about boundaries. This can't happen again." With that, she left, closing the door softly behind her. Mark sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. What had he done? He was married, yes, but his marriage to Lucy felt like a distant memory, a mistake from another life. His feelings for Sarah were real, strong, and growing stronger each day. But Sarah was right. He was still married, still JJ's father. He couldn't just throw caution to the wind and pursue a relationship with Sarah, no matter how much he wanted to. As he lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, Mark's mind raced with conflicting thoughts and emotions. He loved JJ more than anything in the world, and he knew he had responsibilities as a father. But didn't he deserve happiness too? The memory of Sarah's almost kiss lingered, and with it, a spark of hope for a different future. But first, he knew he had to sort out his situation with Lucy. He couldn't keep living in this limbo, torn between his marital vows and his growing feelings for Sarah. Tomorrow, he decided, he would try to contact Lucy. It was time to have a serious conversation about their future, or lack thereof. The next morning, Mark woke up determined to contact Lucy and sort out their situation. However, as he reached for his phone, he heard the sound of keys jingling in the lock of the front door. Confused, he got up and walked into the living room just as Lucy stepped inside. She looked different, tired, subdued, and a bit disheveled. Her eyes met Mark's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Lucy," Mark finally said, his voice a mix of surprise and uncertainty. "You're back." Lucy nodded, setting down her suitcase. "I am. Mark. I've done a lot of thinking while I was away. I've realized how selfish and irresponsible I've been." Mark stood there, unsure of how to respond. Part of him wanted to unleash all the frustration and anger he'd been holding back, but another part was curious about this seemingly changed Lucy. "I've changed," Lucy continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to make amends. Give me another chance, please. I want to be a good wife and mother." Mark felt a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, skepticism, a flicker of hope, and guilt over his feelings for Sarah. Before he could respond, JJ's cries echoed from the nursery. Without hesitation, Lucy moved towards the sound. "I'll get him," she said, determination in her voice. Mark watched in astonishment as Lucy picked up JJ, cooing softly to him and changing his diaper with a tenderness he'd rarely seen from her before. As Lucy tended to JJ, Mark's phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. "On my way. Hope you and JJ had a good night." Panic rose in Mark's chest. How was he going to explain Sarah to Lucy? And more importantly, how was he going to explain Lucy's return to Sarah? "Who's Sarah?" Lucy asked, having noticed the message preview on Mark's phone screen. Mark took a deep breath. She's been helping me with JJ and the house while you were gone. She's a student who works part-time as a cleaner." Lucy's face fell slightly, but she nodded. "I see. Well, I suppose we should thank her for her help, but we won't be needing her services anymore. I'm back now, and I'm going to step up and do my part." Mark felt a pang in his heart at the thought of not seeing Sarah every day, but he pushed it aside. "Lucy, are you sure about this? It's a big change." "I'm sure," Lucy said firmly, bouncing JJ gently in her arms. "I've realized what's truly important. I want us to be a family, Mark. A real family." Conflicted, Mark nodded slowly. "Okay. We can try. But Lucy, things can't go back to how they were before. We need to talk about everything that's happened." Lucy agreed, and as they sat down to have their first real conversation in months, Mark couldn't help but feel a mix of hope and trepidation. Could Lucy really have changed? And what about his feelings for Sarah? As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Mark's heart raced. He knew it was Sarah, and he had no idea how to handle what was about to unfold. Mark's heart pounded as he approached the door. He opened it to find Sarah standing there, her usual warm smile on her face. However, her expression quickly changed to confusion when she saw Lucy behind Mark, holding JJ. "Oh," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't realize." Mark stepped into the hallway, partially closing the door behind him. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. Lucy just returned this morning. I had no idea she was coming back." Sarah nodded, her eyes downcast. "I see. Well, I suppose you won't be needing my help anymore then." "Sarah, Mark started, but he was interrupted by Lucy opening the door wider. "Hello," Lucy said, her voice polite but cool. "You must be Sarah. Thank you for all your help while I was away. We really appreciate it." Sarah forced a smile. "It was my pleasure. JJ is a wonderful child." An awkward silence fell over them. Mark felt torn, wanting to say something to Sarah but acutely aware of Lucy's presence. "Well," Sarah finally said, "I should go. I'm sure you all have a lot to catch up on." As Sarah turned to leave, Mark called out, "Wait." Both Sarah and Lucy looked at him in surprise. "I need to pay you for this week's work," Mark fumbled, reaching for his wallet. Sarah shook her head. "It's fine, Mark. Don't worry about it." "No, please," Mark insisted, pressing some money into her hand. "You've done so much for us. It's the least I can do." Their hands touched for a moment, and Mark felt a jolt of electricity. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, a world of unspoken words passed between them. "Thank you for everything," Mark said softly. "Take care of yourself, Sarah." Sarah nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You too, Mark. And you, JJ," she added, gently touching the baby's cheek. "Be good for your parents." With that, Sarah turned and walked away. Mark watched her go, feeling as though a part of him was leaving with her. As he closed the door and turned back to Lucy, he saw her watching him with a mix of suspicion and hurt in her eyes. "You two seemed close," Lucy said, her voice carefully neutral. Mark sighed. "Sarah has been a great help, Lucy. She took care of JJ and kept the house in order while I focused on my studies. That's all." Lucy nodded, but Mark could see she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, like I said, we won't be needing her services anymore. I'm here now, and I'm committed to making this work." As Lucy went to put JJ down for a nap, Mark sat heavily on the couch. He felt a profound sense of loss. Sarah had become such an integral part of his life, and now she was gone. He knew it was the right thing to do for his marriage and for JJ, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just let something precious slip away. Mark realized that the road ahead would be challenging. He and Lucy had a lot of issues to work through, and he had to deal with his lingering feelings for Sarah. As he heard Lucy softly singing to JJ in the nursery, he hoped that somehow they could find a way to rebuild their family. But deep down, he wondered if things would ever truly be the same again. Several weeks had passed since Lucy's return. The atmosphere in the apartment was tense, with Mark and Lucy trying to navigate their new dynamic. Lucy was making efforts to be more involved with JJ and the household, but years of habits were hard to break, and Mark found himself constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. One sunny afternoon, Sarah was walking home from her classes, her mind still occupied with thoughts of Mark and JJ. She missed them terribly, but she knew she had done the right thing by stepping away. As she approached her small apartment building, her phone buzzed with a new email notification. Curious, she opened it and nearly dropped her phone in shock. It was from the university's scholarship committee. With trembling hands, she read the message. Dear Sarah, we are pleased to inform you that you have been awarded a full scholarship for the upcoming academic year. Sarah let out a joyful cry, startling a nearby pigeon. She rushed up to her apartment, bursting through the door. Mommy, she called out excitedly. Mommy, where are you? Sarah's mother, Grace, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. What is it? Why all the excitement? Sarah's eyes were brimming with happy tears as she showed her mother the email. I got the scholarship, Mommy, I got it. I can finish my degree without worrying about the fees. Grace's face lit up with pride and joy. She embraced her daughter tightly. Oh, my darling girl, I'm so proud of you. You've worked so hard for this. As they celebrated, Sarah couldn't help but think of Mark. He had always encouraged her to keep applying for scholarships, even when she felt like giving up. A part of her wanted to share this news with him, but she knew it wasn't appropriate. What's wrong, dear? Grace asked, noticing the sudden change in Sarah's expression. Sarah shook her head, forcing a smile. Nothing, Mommy. I'm just overwhelmed. This changes everything for us. Grace nodded understanding. It does indeed. But Sarah, remember that you earned this. Your hard work and dedication made this happen. As they sat down to discuss the details of the scholarship, Sarah's phone buzzed again. It was a message from one of her classmates. Hey Sarah, did you hear? Mark from our business law class topped the semester. Professor Williams was raving about his performance. Thought you'd want to know since you two seemed close. Sarah stared at the message, a mix of emotions washing over her. She was genuinely happy for Mark's success, but it also brought back all the feelings she had been trying to suppress. Is everything all right? Grace asked, noticing her daughter's distraction. Sarah nodded, putting her phone away. Yes, Mommy. Just some news about a classmate doing well in exams. As they continued their celebration, Sarah pushed thoughts of Mark to the back of her mind. This was her moment, her achievement. And despite the lingering ache in her heart, she was determined to focus on the bright future that now lay ahead of her. Several days after Sarah's departure, Mark found himself in his university's administration office. He had come to inquire about a scholarship application he had submitted earlier in the semester, hoping for some financial relief to support his family. As he waited for the clerk to pull up his file, Mark's mind wandered to Sarah. He wondered how she was doing, if she had found another job, if she missed JJ as much as JJ seemed to miss her. His thoughts were interrupted by the clerk's voice. Mr. Chidi, the clerk said, it seems there's been a mix-up with your application. Mark's heart sank. A mix-up? What kind of mix-up? The clerk tapped away at her keyboard, frowning slightly. Well, it appears that your application was accidentally processed under another student's name. A Sarah Okafor. Mark's eyes widened in surprise. Sarah Okafor? But that's... Yes, the clerk continued, and it seems that Ms. Okafor has been awarded the scholarship based on the merits of your application. Mark sat there, stunned. He had unknowingly helped Sarah get the scholarship she so desperately needed. A mix of emotions washed over him, happiness for Sarah's good fortune, disappointment at his own loss, and a strange sense of satisfaction that he had, in some way, been able to help her. "Is there any way to correct this?" Mark asked, though he already knew the answer he wanted to give. The clerk looked at him sympathetically. "We could certainly try to rectify the situation, Mr. Chidi. It would mean withdrawing the scholarship from Ms. Okafor and awarding it to you instead. Would you like me to start that process?" Mark paused for a moment, thinking about Sarah's joy when she received the news, imagining the opportunities this would open up for her. He shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "Let it stand. Sarah, Ms. Okafor deserves this opportunity." The clerk looked surprised but nodded. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Chidi. I'll make a note in your file about your decision." As Mark left the office, he felt a strange mix of emotions. He knew he had done the right thing, but he couldn't help feeling a twinge of regret. Not for his decision, but for the circumstances that had led to this moment. He pulled out his phone, his finger hovering over Sarah's contact. He wanted to tell her, to hear her voice, to share in her joy. But he hesitated, remembering the promise he had made to Lucy to focus on their family. With a sigh, he put his phone away and headed home. As he walked, he couldn't help but smile, picturing Sarah's face when she had received the news. Despite everything, he was genuinely happy for her. When he arrived home, he found Lucy playing with JJ in the living room. She looked up at him with a tentative smile. "How was your day?" she asked. Mark sat down next to them, tickling JJ's tummy. "It was enlightening," he said, deciding to keep the scholarship mix-up to himself. "How about yours?" As Lucy launched into a story about JJ's latest antics, Mark listened attentively, pushing thoughts of Sarah to the back of his mind. He had made his choice, and now he had to commit to it fully. But a small part of him couldn't help but wonder what Sarah was doing at that very moment, and if she ever thought of him too. Several weeks had passed since the scholarship revelation. Mark had thrown himself into his studies and his efforts to rebuild his relationship with Lucy. Though progress was slow, they were both trying their best for JJ's sake. One crisp morning, Mark was preparing breakfast while Lucy fed JJ. The domesticity of the scene almost made Mark believe they could make this work. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door shattered the peaceful atmosphere. Mark opened the door to find two stern-faced police officers standing in the hallway. "Good morning, sir. Is this the residence of Lucy Chidi?" one of the officers asked. Mark's heart raced. "Yes, it is. I'm her husband." "What's this about?" The officers exchanged a glance before the second one spoke. "We need to speak with Mrs. Chidi. Is she home?" "Who is it, Mark?" Lucy called from inside. Mark turned, his face pale. "Lucy, it's the police. They want to speak with you." Lucy appeared in the doorway, JJ on her hip. Her eyes widened with fear as she saw the officers. "Lucy Chidi," the first officer said, his voice grave, "you're under arrest for the murder of Daniel Okonkwo." Mark felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "Murder," he gasped. "What's going on?" Lucy's face crumpled. She handed JJ to Mark, her hands shaking. "I can explain," she whispered. As the officers read Lucy her rights and handcuffed her, Mark stood frozen, clutching JJ tightly. Neighbors peered out of their apartments, whispering and pointing. "Lucy," Mark managed to say, "what have you done?" Tears streamed down Lucy's face. "I'm sorry, Mark. I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I panicked and ran." The officers gently but firmly led Lucy away. As they reached the stairs, Lucy turned back to Mark, her eyes pleading. "Please, take care of JJ. And call my lawyer. His number is in my phone." Mark nodded numbly, watching as his wife was escorted out of the building. JJ, sensing the tension, began to cry. As the door closed behind them, Mark sank to the floor, cradling his son. His mind raced with questions. Who was Daniel Okonkwo? What had happened during Lucy's trip? How could she have kept this secret? The sound of his phone ringing snapped him out of his daze. It was Lucy's mother. "Mark, Her voice was frantic. "I just got a call from Lucy. What's happening? Is it true?" Mark took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. "I don't know all the details yet. The police just took Lucy. They're saying she's involved in a murder." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Oh, my God. Oh, Lucy. What are we going to do?" "I don't know," Mark admitted, his voice breaking. "I just don't know." As he ended the call, Mark looked down at JJ, who had quieted and was looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. In that moment, Mark realized that everything had changed once again. The fragile piece they had been building was shattered, and he was left to pick up the pieces. With a heavy heart, Mark stood up, still holding JJ close. He had to be strong now, for his son. He needed to call Lucy's lawyer, to understand what was happening, to figure out how to navigate this new, terrifying reality. As he dialed the lawyer's number, Mark couldn't help but think of Sarah. In the midst of this chaos, a part of him wished she was there, offering her quiet strength and support. But he pushed the thought away. This was his burden to bear, his family's crisis to face. The lawyer answered, and Mark took a deep breath. It was time to face the harsh truth of Lucy's secret and whatever consequences it would bring. In the days following Lucy's arrest, Mark's world became a blur of police stations, lawyers' offices, and sleepless nights. He juggled caring for JJ, attending his classes, and trying to understand the shocking turn of events that had upended their lives. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mark was allowed to visit Lucy in the detention center. As he sat across from her, separated by a thick pane of glass, he barely recognized the woman before him. Lucy's usually vibrant face was pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Lucy," Mark began, his voice hoarse, "please, tell me what happened. I need to understand." Lucy took a shaky breath, her hands fidgeting nervously. "It all started during that trip I took for my friend's wedding," she began. "I met Daniel at the reception. He was charming, and I was feeling lonely and neglected. We drank too much, and I ended up going back to his hotel room." Mark felt a stab of pain at her words, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "I regretted it immediately," Lucy said, tears welling in her eyes. "I told him it was a mistake and that I wanted to leave. But he got angry. He tried to force himself on me. I panicked and pushed him away. He stumbled and hit his head on the corner of the bedside table. There was so much blood." Lucy's voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. Mark instinctively reached out, only to be stopped by the glass between them. "I was terrified," Lucy continued after a moment. "I didn't know what to do. So I ran. I convinced myself that if I just came home and pretended nothing happened, it would all go away. But it didn't. The guilt has been eating me alive, Mark." Mark sat back, trying to process everything he'd just heard. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger at Lucy's infidelity, horror at the accident, and a confusing mix of sympathy and disappointment. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly. "We could have faced this together." Lucy shook her head, her eyes filled with regret. "I was ashamed. I thought I could protect you and JJ by keeping it a secret. I was wrong. I've made everything so much worse." As their visiting time came to an end, Mark stood up, feeling emotionally drained. "I'll talk to the lawyer," he said. "We'll figure this out, Lucy." Lucy nodded, pressing her hand against the glass. "I'm so sorry, Mark. For everything." As Mark left the detention center, he felt the weight of their situation pressing down on him. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Lucy's actions had shattered the trust between them, but the circumstances of Daniel's death were complex. Driving home, Mark's mind raced with questions. Could their marriage survive this? What would happen to JJ if Lucy went to prison? And how would he manage everything on his own? As he pulled up to their apartment building, Mark saw a familiar figure waiting by the entrance. It was Sarah, looking worried and uncertain. "I heard what happened," she said softly as Mark approached. "I thought you might need some help with JJ." For a moment, Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him at the sight of her. But then reality set in, and he realized how complicated things had become. Sarah, he began, unsure of how to proceed. I appreciate your offer, but I'm not sure if. Sarah held up a hand, stopping him. I'm not here to complicate things, Mark. I'm here as a friend. You and JJ shouldn't have to go through this alone. As they stood there, the weight of the situation hanging between them, Mark realized that he had some difficult decisions to make. About Lucy, about their future, and about the people he wanted in his life moving forward. Over the next few weeks, Mark's life settled into a new, challenging routine. He balanced caring for JJ, attending his classes, and regularly visiting Lucy at the detention center. Sarah's offer of help had been a lifeline, and despite his initial hesitation, Mark found himself grateful for her support. One evening, after putting JJ to bed, Mark sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and case files. Sarah was washing the dishes, having stayed to help with dinner and JJ's bedtime routine. How's the case looking? Sarah asked gently, drying her hands on a towel. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's complicated. The lawyer thinks we might be able to argue self-defense, given the circumstances. But Lucy leaving the scene and not reporting it for so long, it doesn't look good. Sarah nodded sympathetically. And how are you holding up? Mark looked up at her, his eyes tired and conflicted. I don't know, Sarah. I'm angry at Lucy for her infidelity, for keeping this secret. But I also understand her fear, her panic. And then I feel guilty for even considering a future without her. Sarah sat down across from him. Mark, it's okay to have mixed feelings. What Lucy did was wrong, but the situation is far from black and white. Mark nodded, then made a decision. Sarah, I need to tell you something. I've decided to end my marriage to Lucy. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Are you sure? That's a big decision, Mark. I know, Mark said, his voice firm. But I've realized that even before this incident, our marriage was broken. We rushed into it too young, and we've both made mistakes. JJ deserves better than parents who are constantly at odds. What about Lucy's case? Sarah asked. I'll support her through the legal process, Mark replied. She's still JJ's mother, and I want to make sure she gets a fair trial. But romantically, we're over. Sarah reached out and squeezed his hand. I'm here for you, Mark. Whatever you need. Mark smiled gratefully, but then his expression turned serious. Sarah, I need you to know something else. I have feelings for you. Strong feelings. But I can't act on them right now. It wouldn't be fair to you, to me, or to Lucy. Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I understand, Mark. And I have feelings for you too. But you're right. Now isn't the time. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their confessions hanging in the air. Finally, Mark spoke. I need to focus on JJ and on finishing my degree. And I need to deal with the fallout from Lucy's case. But maybe, someday. Sarah smiled softly. Someday. For now, let's just focus on getting through this, one day at a time. As Sarah prepared to leave, Mark walked her to the door. Thank you, he said earnestly. For everything. Sarah nodded. That's what friends are for, Mark. I'll see you tomorrow. As he closed the door behind her, Mark felt a mix of sadness and hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was making the right decisions for himself and for JJ. He walked to JJ's room and looked in on his sleeping son. We're going to be okay, little one, he whispered. It might take some time, but we're going to be okay. With that, Mark returned to the kitchen table, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Several months had passed since Lucy's arrest and Mark's decision to end their marriage. The legal proceedings had been grueling, but finally, a resolution was reached. Lucy had been convicted of involuntary manslaughter but given a suspended sentence due to the circumstances of the case. She was required to undergo counseling and perform community service. On a warm Saturday morning, Mark sat on a park bench, watching JJ toddle around the playground. The little boy had grown so much in the past few months, both physically and emotionally. Despite the turmoil in their lives, JJ remained a bright, cheerful child, adapting to the changes with remarkable resilience. As Mark observed his son, he reflected on the whirlwind of changes in his own life. He had finally completed his degree, graduating with honors despite the challenges he faced. Lucy was slowly rebuilding her life, focusing on her therapy and trying to be a better mother to JJ during her supervised visits. Lost in thought, Mark almost didn't notice when someone sat down beside him. "He's getting so big," Sarah's voice came softly. Mark turned to her, a smile spreading across his face. "Sarah, hi. I didn't expect to see you here." Sarah shrugged, her eyes on JJ. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. How are you doing?" "Better," Mark replied honestly. "It's been a long road, but I feel like I can finally see a way forward." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching JJ play. "Sarah," Mark began, turning to face her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking over these past months. About my life, about JJ's future, about us." Sarah met his gaze, her expression a mix of hope and caution. "Oh." Mark took a deep breath. "I meant what I said all those months ago. I have strong feelings for you. And now, with everything settled with Lucy, I was wondering if you'd like to start over. As friends first, and see where it leads." Sarah's face softened, a smile tugging at her lips. "I'd like that, Mark. I'd like that very much." Just then, JJ came running over, his face lit up with excitement. "Daddy." "Sarah," he exclaimed, throwing himself into their arms. As they hugged the little boy, Mark and Sarah's eyes met over his head. There was a world of unspoken promise in that gaze, of friendship, of potential love, of a future they could build together. "How about we all go for ice cream?" Mark suggested, standing up and lifting JJ into his arms. "Ice cream," JJ cheered, while Sarah nodded in agreement. As they walked out of the park together, Mark felt a sense of peace wash over him. The past year had been filled with unexpected challenges and heartaches, but it had also brought growth, self-discovery, and new beginnings. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but as he looked at JJ's smiling face and felt Sarah's presence beside him, Mark knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. And so, as they stepped onto the sunlit street, a new chapter in their lives began, one filled with hope, second chances, and the promise of brighter days ahead. The moral lesson of this story is that rushing into marriage without proper preparation and maturity can lead to significant challenges and potential heartbreak. Honesty and open communication are crucial in relationships, as keeping secrets can have devastating consequences. In times of crisis, true friends and support systems are invaluable, providing strength and help when needed most. Second chances and personal growth are possible, even after making mistakes, but they require self-reflection, accountability, and a willingness to change. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please stay tuned in for more passionate stories like this, and until next time, keep smiling. We love you all.